Men tried to attack an elderly black woman, not knowing her dog was a retired police officer. Life has a way of surprising us, especially when we least expect it. What starts as an ordinary evening can quickly turn into something unforgettable. Something that tests your courage and resolve. This is a story about bravery, loyalty, and how one unexpected hero reminded everyone that doing what's right always prevails. Sit back and let me take you on a journey. A night that changed everything for a quiet neighborhood in Maplewood, New Jersey. My name is Margaret Ellis, but everyone in the neighborhood calls me Maggie. I'm 65 years old, widowed for nearly a decade, and Maplewood has been my home for as long as I can remember. The neighborhood is quiet, with tree-lined streets and houses that seem to have been pulled from a Norman Rockwell painting. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name and gossip spreads faster than the morning paper. Every evening, I take my dog, Max, for a walk. Max isn't just any dog, he's a Belgian Malinois, strong and sharp, with a coat the color of caramel and eyes that seem to see straight into your soul. Max came into my life 5 years ago when he retired from the police force. His handler, an old friend of my late husband, entrusted me with him, saying, "Maggie, if anyone deserves a protector like Max, it's you." That night started like any other. The air was crisp, the streetlights hummed faintly, and the autumn leaves crunched beneath my boots as Max and I set out for our nightly walk. We had our usual route, down Pine Street, past the library, and then a loop around the park. Max trotted ahead of me, his leash slack but his ears alert, always scanning, always watching. I should have known something was off the moment we turned the corner onto Sycamore Avenue. The street was unusually quiet, not a single car passing by, not even the distant sound of television sets leaking through open windows. Then I saw them, 3 figures standing under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. At first, I thought they might just be teenagers messing around, but as we got closer, I noticed the way they moved, huddled close, whispering, and then falling silent when they noticed us. Max's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. He stopped walking, his body tense and ready, his sharp instincts picking up something I hadn't yet fully grasped. One of the men stepped forward, his hands shoved into the pockets of a leather jacket. He was tall, with a shaved head and a smirk that sent a chill down my spine. "Out for a little stroll, huh?" he called out, his tone mocking. The other 2 chuckled, their laughter echoing in the stillness of the night. I tightened my grip on Max's leash and squared my shoulders. "Just heading home," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But they didn't move out of the way. Instead, they stepped closer, forming a loose semicircle around us. Max let out a sharp bark, his tail stiff as a rod. The tallest man laughed, nudging his companion. "What's the matter, lady? Scared your mutt can't handle us?" I didn't answer. My heart was pounding, and a voice in my head screamed for me to turn around and run. But Max didn't back down. His growl deepened, a sound so low and menacing it seemed to vibrate through the pavement. It was then that I realized these men weren't just looking for trouble, they had already decided to bring it. "You've made a big mistake," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The men laughed, but it was a nervous kind of laughter, the kind that masked uncertainty. And as they took another step forward, Max shifted his weight, his muscles coiled like a spring. Whatever was about to happen, I knew Max wouldn't let them harm me. This dog, this retired police officer, wasn't just a pet, he was my guardian, my shadow, my hero, and these men were about to find it out the hard way. The air around us seemed to thicken. charged with tension. Max didn't move a muscle, but his eyes never left the men. His body was a coiled spring, ready to unleash at a moment's notice. I could feel his raw energy through the leash, a steady pulse of power that filled me with both fear and relief. The tallest of the three men took another step forward, his smirk fading into a sneer. "Look, lady, we don't want any trouble. Just hand over your purse, and we'll be on our way." His words didn't match his tone. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Behind him, the other two men spread out slightly, their movements calculated, like predators circling prey. One of them pulled something metallic from his pocket, and the dim light of the street lamp caught it, a knife. My stomach clenched. Max's growl deepened, a sound so primal it made the hair on my arms stand on end. The man with the knife noticed and stopped in his tracks. "Relax. It's just a dog," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. He turned to his taller companion. "You think it's gonna do anything?" The tallest man shrugged and stepped closer, his confidence unshaken, or at least that's what he wanted us to believe. "Yeah, right. She's bluffing. It's just a dumb mutt." Max barked then, sharp and commanding, a sound that echoed off the quiet houses lining the street. The tallest man flinched, his composure cracking just slightly. He glanced at the other two, clearly looking for reassurance, but none came. The second man tightened his grip on the knife, his eyes darting between Max and me. The third man, smaller and skinnier than the rest, looked like he wanted to bolt but didn't dare move. I stood my ground, every fiber of my being screaming to run. But running wasn't an option, not with Max rooted to the spot, his entire focus on the threat in front of us. I wasn't about to abandon him, and I knew he'd never abandon me. The man with the knife finally broke the standoff. He lunged forward, the blade flashing in the dim light, aiming straight for Max. Time seemed to slow as I cried out, "Max, no!" But Max didn't need my warning. He moved like lightning, faster than I thought possible for any dog. With a powerful leap, he closed the distance between himself and the attacker. His jaws clamped onto the man's arm, the knife clattering to the ground as the man let out a scream that shattered the stillness of the night. "Get this thing off me!" the man shrieked, thrashing wildly. But Max didn't let go. His grip was precise, controlled. He wasn't just biting, he was neutralizing the threat. The man stumbled backward, falling to the pavement as Max pulled him off balance. The tallest man yelled something incoherent and rushed forward, a wooden plank in his hands. "Get him!" he shouted to the third man, who hesitated before reluctantly following. They moved toward Max together, their desperation palpable. "Max, watch out!" I shouted, my voice raw with fear. But Max was ready. He released the first man, who collapsed onto the ground clutching his arm, and turned to face the new threat. The man with the plank swung it hard, but Max sidestepped with ease, his movements fluid and precise. Before the man could recover, Max lunged at him, knocking him to the ground with a force that seemed impossible for a dog his size. The plank rolled out of the man's grasp as he lay sprawled on the pavement, groaning in pain. The third man, now visibly trembling, took a step back. "This dog isn't normal," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't say," I shot back, my own voice steadier now as adrenaline surged through me. Max turned his attention to the last man standing. The poor guy looked like he was about to cry. He raised his hands in surrender, his voice shaking as he stammered, Look, lady, we didn't mean anything by it. Just call off the dog." "Okay, too late for that," I replied coldly. "You should have thought about that before you decided to mess with me." Max didn't lunge this time. He stood his ground, his eyes locked onto the man, daring him to make a move. The man, now pale as a ghost, turned and bolted, his sneakers slapping against the pavement as he ran. For a moment, everything was still. Max stood over the two men on the ground, his chest heaving, but his focus unbroken. I tightened my grip on his leash, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a shaky sense of relief. "You messed with the wrong dog," I muttered under my breath. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Came the calm voice on the other end. This is Margaret Ellis. I'm at Sycamore Avenue, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. 3 men tried to attack me. But my dog, he stopped them. 2 are still here. You'd better send someone quick. The operator assured me help was on the way. And as I hung up, I glanced down at Max. His ears perked up slightly, as if he knew reinforcements were coming. I knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "You're a good boy, Max," I whispered, my voice breaking slightly. "The best." The sound of distant sirens grew louder, cutting through the night air. The ordeal wasn't over yet. But one thing was clear. Max had saved my life. And those men had learned a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, filling the empty streets with an urgency that matched the pounding of my heart. Max stood by my side, his body still taut with readiness. He didn't take his eyes off the 2 men on the ground, one clutching his arm and the other sprawled out, moaning softly. They had learned firsthand that Max wasn't just any dog. But the lesson wasn't over yet. When the first patrol car pulled up, its red and blue lights flashing against the darkened houses, a wave of relief washed over me. I raised a shaky hand to signal them, and 2 officers stepped out, their faces serious as they assessed the scene. The older officer, a man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, froze when his eyes landed on Max. His stern expression softened, and his mouth parted in what I could only describe as surprise. "Is that," he started. But he didn't finish the thought. Instead, he approached cautiously, his eyes darting between me, Max, and the 2 groaning men. "Mom, are you all right?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "I'm fine," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Thanks to Max here, these men tried to attack me. Max stopped them." The younger officer, probably in his late 20s, looked at Max with a mix of awe and disbelief. "Stop them, you mean?" He trailed off, his gaze shifting to the man clutching his arm, then to the discarded knife and wooden plank lying on the ground. The older officer squatted down, studying Max closely. "You don't happen to know this dog's history, do you?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. I nodded, still catching my breath. "He's a retired police K9. Came into my life 5 years ago. His handler was a friend of my late husband." "Well, that explains it," the officer said, standing and shaking his head in amazement. "I'd recognize him anywhere. This is Maximus, isn't it? The Maximus." I blinked, caught off guard. "You know him?" "Know him?" The officer chuckled. "I worked with this guy back in the day. Best damn K9 on the force. Took down more suspects than any of us could count. He was a legend in the department." The younger officer's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, this is the Maximus from the training videos?" The older officer nodded. "The one and only." He turned back to me, his expression softening further. "You've got yourself one hell of a partner here, Mom." Before I could respond, the younger officer moved to secure the 2 men on the ground, cuffing them with practiced efficiency. They didn't resist, one was too busy groaning in pain, and the other had clearly given up on any ideas of escape. "Please," the taller man whined, looking up at the officer with pleading eyes. "Call off the dog. He's crazy." The officer smirked and glanced at Max, who was now sitting obediently by my side. His demeanor calm but his gaze still sharp. "Crazy?" he said with a hint of sarcasm. "No, he's just well trained. You're lucky he didn't do worse." The man muttered something under his breath, but the officer silenced him with a glare. Once the two men were secured in the back of the patrol car, the officers turned their attention back to me. The younger one pointed to a nearby security camera mounted on a streetlight. "We'll pull the footage from that camera," he said, "but from the looks of things, it's pretty clear who the aggressors were." I nodded, feeling the weight of the night begin to lift. "Thank you," I said, glancing down at Max. "But honestly, the real hero here is him." The older officer smiled warmly. That's no surprise to anyone who knows him. Maximus always knew who the bad guys were. Even before we did, he reached down to scratch Max behind the ears. And for the first time since the ordeal began, Max wagged his tail slightly, as if acknowledging the recognition. "You know," the officer continued, "when Max retired, there wasn't a single officer who didn't miss him. Seeing him here tonight, it's like he's still on duty." As the officers finished taking my statement and documenting the scene, the neighbors began to trickle out of their homes, drawn by the flashing lights and sirens. I recognized a few familiar faces. Mrs. Harper from across the street, the Rodriguez family from 2 houses down. They whispered among themselves, their eyes wide as they pieced together what had happened. "Margaret," a voice called out. I turned to see my neighbor, Jim, jogging toward me, his face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Jim," I assured him, "thanks to Max." Jim glanced at the patrol car, where the 2 men sat cuffed and sullen, then down at Max, who sat calmly beside me. "I always knew that dog was special," he said, shaking his head. "But tonight, well, he just proved it." The officers eventually finished their work and prepared to leave, but not before the older officer turned to me one last time. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to call, and give Maximus a treat from me. He's earned it." I smiled and nodded, watching as the patrol cars pulled away, their lights fading into the distance. The crowd of neighbors slowly dispersed, leaving me alone with Max under the now quiet street lamp. I knelt beside him, wrapping my arms around his strong neck. "You're incredible, you know that," I whispered. Max leaned into me, his warm, steady presence chasing away the last remnants of fear. As we walked home, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude. Max wasn't just a dog, he was a protector, a partner, and, as it turned out, a legend in his own right. By the next morning, it felt like the entire neighborhood, and half the city, had heard about what happened the night before. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop with calls, texts, and notifications. It was overwhelming, to say the least. As I brewed my morning coffee, Max lay at my feet, his demeanor as calm and collected as ever. The chaos of the previous night hadn't fazed him in the slightest. He stretched lazily, giving me a look that seemed to say, "What's all the fuss about?" But the fuss was just getting started. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I was greeted by a small group of neighbors, each holding something in their hands. Mrs. Harper had brought over a tin of cookies. Jim carried a bag of dog treats. The Rodriguez kids handed me a handmade card that read, "Thank you, Max," in colorful crayon letters. complete with a drawing of Max wearing a superhero cape. "We just wanted to say thank you," Mrs. Harper said, her voice trembling slightly. "What you and Max did last night, it's incredible. You're both heroes." I laughed nervously, brushing off the praise. "I think Max deserves most of the credit," I said, looking down at him. He wagged his tail slightly, his version of a humble nod. But that was only the beginning. By noon, more people had stopped by, each with their own way of expressing gratitude. Someone had even dropped off a gift basket filled with gourmet dog treats, a squeaky toy, and a shiny new leash. Just when I thought things were settling down, a van with a local news station logo pulled up in front of my house. A young reporter with perfectly styled hair and a cameraman in tow approached me hesitantly. "Ms. Ellis," she began, her smile bright and professional. "I'm Sarah Parker with Channel 7 News. We've heard about what happened last night, and we'd love to interview you and Max." I hesitated, not particularly keen on being in the spotlight. But then I glanced down at Max. If anyone deserved recognition, it was him. So I agreed. The interview took place on my front porch. Max sat beside me, his posture regal, as if he understood the importance of the moment. Sarah asked about the events of the previous night, and I recounted the story as honestly as I could, giving Max all the credit. "So, Max was a police dog before coming into your life?" Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. "That's right," I said, nodding. "He served for years and retired with honors. I didn't realize then just how lucky I was to have him. But last night, well, he showed everyone why he's still a hero." As the cameraman focused on Max, Sarah smiled warmly. "He certainly is. Do you have any message for the community after what happened?" I thought for a moment before replying. "Just that we're stronger when we look out for each other. And sometimes, the heroes we need aren't the ones we expect. They're the ones who've been quietly standing by our side all along." That evening, the interview aired during the local news. And to my surprise, it quickly went viral. Social media was abuzz with posts about Max the hero dog. People shared clips of the interview, along with photos of Max looking every bit the noble protector. The hashtag Max the hero dog started trending. And soon, messages of support were pouring in from all over the country. There were heartfelt comments. "What an amazing dog. We need more heroes like Max in this world. This story gave me hope today. Thank you, Max." And some that made me laugh. "Can we get Max his own TV show? K9 Justice has a nice ring to it. Someone get this dog a cape and a medal stat." As the attention grew, I began receiving requests from national outlets wanting to cover the story. Even a well-known morning show reached out, asking if I'd bring Max to their studio for an interview. It was surreal, to say the least. The day after the story aired, I heard another knock at the door. This time, it was a group of uniformed officers. At first, I panicked, thinking something was wrong, but then I recognized one of them. It was Officer Daniels, the man who had identified Max the night before. "Ms. Ellis," he said, his face breaking into a wide grin. "We couldn't let all this attention go by without showing Max some proper appreciation." Behind him, the other officers held a plaque that read, "To Maximus, for outstanding bravery and service to the community." They presented it to me with a sense of ceremony, and I couldn't help but tear up. Max sat stoically beside me, his tail wagging ever so slightly as if he understood the honor. "Max wasn't just a good police dog," Officer Daniels said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was the best. And seeing him protect you like that, it's like he never left the force." That evening, The community held an impromptu gathering in the park near Sycamore Avenue. Dozens of people showed up, many of them bringing their own dogs to meet Max. Kids ran around wearing makeshift superhero capes, pretending to be him. Someone had even made a sign that read, "Thank you, Max," and hung it from a tree. As I looked around at the smiling faces, I realized just how much Max had brought the neighborhood together. He wasn't just my hero, he was everyone's. As the night wound down and Max and I headed home, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For Max, for my neighbors, for the officers who had supported us. It was a night I'd never forget, and one I hoped would inspire others to stand up for what's right. No matter how scary the circumstances. A week had passed since the night Max became a hero. The excitement had started to die down, but its impact lingered in the hearts of everyone in Maplewood. Life was settling back into its familiar rhythm, but there was a new sense of pride in the air. For me, things felt different, calmer, safer, and more connected. Max, as always, carried on like nothing had changed. He didn't care about the accolades, the attention, or the gifts that still trickled in from strangers who had heard his story. To him, the world was simple: protect, serve, and love. One crisp autumn morning, I received an email from the Maplewood City Council. They wanted to honor Max with a special ceremony in the park where everything had unfolded. At first, I hesitated. Max wasn't one for fanfare, and neither was I. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about celebrating Max. It was about bringing people together and highlighting the values he stood for: loyalty, courage, and justice. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday. Word spread quickly, and by the time we arrived at the park, a crowd had gathered: families with kids, dog owners with their furry companions, even officers from Max's old precinct, all stood waiting under a banner that read, "Celebrating Max." Our hero, Max, trotted beside me, his posture relaxed yet commanding, as if he knew this moment was for him. When we reached the small stage, the mayor stepped forward, a broad smile on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the park, "we're here today to honor a very special member of our community. Max may be retired, but he hasn't stopped serving. His bravery reminded us all of the strength and loyalty that comes from standing up for what's right." She gestured toward a covered object next to the stage. "And so, as a token of our gratitude, we'd like to unveil something permanent to commemorate Max's actions." With a flourish, the cover was pulled away, revealing a bronze plaque mounted on a stone pedestal. The inscription read, "In honor of Maximus, for his unwavering courage, loyalty, and service to our community. May his story inspire us to protect and care for one another. Always." Tears welled in my eyes as I read the words. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around Max, who wagged his tail slightly, his ears flicking as if to say, "Not bad for a day's work." After the ceremony, people approached us to share their gratitude. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, tugged on my sleeve and looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mrs. Ellis," he said shyly, "do you think Max could teach my dog to be brave, too?" I smiled, patting Max on the head. "I think Max would tell you that bravery isn't something you're taught. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's scary. And I bet your dog would protect you just the same if the time ever came." The boy nodded solemnly and gave Max a quick pat before running off to his parents. As the day went on, I realized how much Max's story had touched people. It wasn't just about a dog defending his owner, it was about courage, loyalty, and the reminder that good will always triumph over bad. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Max and I took our usual walk through the neighborhood. The streets felt different now, not because of the ceremony, but because of the bond that had grown among everyone here. People waved as we passed, and a few kids yelled out, "Hi, Max," as they ran by with their own dogs. When we reached the corner of Sycamore Avenue, I stopped in my tracks. There, mounted on the street light pole, was a second plaque, smaller than the one in the park but just as meaningful. It read, "Here, Maximus stood his ground and protected his owner, Margaret Ellis," a reminder to all that bravery and loyalty come in many forms. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart swelling with gratitude. Max sniffed the air beside me, oblivious to the plaque but content just being there with me. "You're something else, Max," I said softly, giving him a scratch behind the ears. "The world could learn a lot from you." He glanced up at me, his deep brown eyes filled with a wisdom I could never fully understand. Then nudged my hand as if to say, "Come on, let's keep moving." The weeks that followed were quieter, but the impact of that night remained. People seemed kinder, more vigilant, and more connected. Max and I continued our nightly walks, and every time we passed those plaques, I felt a deep sense of pride, not just for what Max had done, but for the way his actions had reminded people of what truly matters. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Loyalty isn't just about protection, it's about being there, through thick and thin. And heroes, they don't wear capes or crave the spotlight. Sometimes, they're just dogs with wagging tails and hearts full of love. Max was my hero, my protector, and my friend, and as long as he was by my side, I knew I'd never walk alone. As Max and I continue our quiet, peaceful walks through the streets of Maplewood, I'm reminded every day of the lessons he's taught me, and, by extension, all of us. His courage that night wasn't just about his training or instincts, it was about loyalty, trust, and an unshakable commitment to do what's right, no matter the danger. In a world that often feels divided, Max's story reminds us of the values that unite us all, the importance of protecting one another, standing up against wrongdoing, and embracing the courage to act when it matters most. These qualities aren't exclusive to heroes like Max, they're within each of us, waiting to shine when we choose to put kindness, bravery, and integrity first. A message for today's world. To everyone watching this story, let it inspire you to be brave in the face of adversity. Stand firm for what's right, even when it's challenging. Show loyalty to those who depend on you. And remember, true heroes don't always wear capes or badges. Sometimes, they have 4 legs, wagging tails, and hearts full of unconditional love. If you enjoyed this story and the lessons it brings, I invite you to join our growing community. Click subscribe now to stay updated with more inspiring and heartwarming stories from around the world. It's completely free, and you'll be the first to hear new tales of courage, hope, and humanity. Let's spread positivity, share lessons that matter, and build a community of people who believe in the power of doing good. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay safe, stay kind, and remember, there's a hero in all of us.